Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Larp101 panel. How's it going? So, there are spaces up front if you guys want to get up front.
We don't bite unless you give us express consent that you would like us to.
It's very important.
I promise, we're not scary.
Yeah, we don't bite.
We are video recording us and audio recording the room. The hope is that we can maybe get some useful content out of this and put it online for people that didn't get to make the panel who wanted to come. So we'll go ahead and dive right in with introductions.
Oh, hi. I'm Jess. My pronouns are she, her. And yeah, I'm a giant LARPing nerd.
And I'm Joe. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm also a giant LARPing nerd. I've been LARPing since 1996, on and off, here and there.
I was 7, so I was not.
Yeah. And I've staffed 4 different LARPs, and I currently am the director of Lost Colonies LARP. I've put some of our flyers there. If you want to pick one up, that'd be great.
Cool. Awesome. I'm Barbara. She, her pronouns. I am a LARPer of many, and I don't know. You can find me online at Mustache Babs. I do writing and editing and offer diversity consulting through a creative company that we created called Old Crone Studio that offers LARPs diversity consulting and sort of like review their content for inclusivity.
I didn't realize you were supposed to do our LARP resumes.
That's okay.
So on top of just being in general LARPer, I also am on staff with a couple of major LARPs for various events, either as an NPC or as a sensitivity coordinator, which is fun. I am currently working on both my own individual LARP called In the Shadows. We're coming to the end of our hiatus soon, which is going to be awesome. And I'm also a cultural lead for Entropic Endeavor's Velvet Noir game.
Nice.
So that is fun.
So, just real quick, by a show of hands, who has LARPed before? Sort of? Okay.
Would you all believe me if I told you that you're lying? You have all LARPed before.
You are LARPing right now.
You're LARPing right now. It's a glorified word for playing pretend.
Yep. I always like to reference, the floor is lava, right? Everybody's played the floor is lava at some point, or picked up a stick in the woods and pretended they were shooting their friends or something like that, right? We all tend to LARP when we're kids, and then we tend to grow out of it because society.
Stupid. Don't grow out of it.
We did this panel last year, and we took some notes from that, and we're going to kind of update that as time goes on. I like to talk about LARP as having, using the acronym, LARP. It stands for live action role play, and really to my mind, the most important one of those words is play, right? It is a form of entertainment. It is for fun, and if you're doing it and you're not having fun, in my opinion, you're doing something wrong, right?
I firmly believe that you can't LARP wrong. There's no right or wrong way to LARP, and to piggyback on it, there's different ways to have fun. I am dead inside, and the only way that I can have fun is by making myself cry while pretending to be somebody else. And to most people, they look at you and they're like, that can't be fun. You're in hysterical tears. I'm like, I'm having a great time. But playing is one of the most important parts. Live action is probably the other important part, because otherwise it's just D&D.
Yeah, so at least in the American tradition of LARP, it kind of developed in many ways out of D&D in the woods. There are many other LARP traditions, and we're going to talk about some of that today as well. So that's not the only origin of it, but in my mind, the live action portion means that you're, one, embodying a character that is not yourself. That character can be very, very small veneer, or it can be, a complete cosplay with a whole different mindset as well. And two, the action is taking place in real time. Yeah. There's not really like turn-based actions like you get in a board game or a tabletop role-playing game many times. That's my personal take. You ask,
and that has some caveats. There are some games that use it. There are very few rules which defines this is a LARP and this is not. If you are there in your meat space playing a game that includes roles, you are LARPing. That includes like improv games and things like that. It's all glorified. Everything's LARPing.
I like Mike Young's definition. If you call it a LARP, you're LARPing.
Yeah.
That's it.
If you don't call it a LARP, you're not LARPing. There's many online arguments about is this a LARP or not, and the way that Mike and I like to resolve it is ask them.
Yeah.
If they call it a LARP, it's a LARP.
Which is the nice thing about LARP, right? I think that's the really nice things, that there is no sort of like walls confining us into what is LARP. And I think that's the really nice thing for me as a LARPer, and sort of exploring what those games can or cannot be. You know, we can spend a game crying all about it and be super dramatic and still have a great time, or we can still have the fairies and the woods and the running around and camping and whatever else, and they can all live happily ever after in the world without necessarily having to point fingers and say, no, that's wrong, or this is more right, or whatever else.
Also, gatekeeping is...
No.
Yeah,
Nobody wants that.
Nobody
The
wants
community's getting a lot better. Who's familiar with some of the stereotypes that there are with LARPs? I'm assuming people know the internet and have
You've
seen,
heard of it.
like a lot of people when they think of LARPing, they think of like predominantly cisgendered white passing men hitting each other with foam swords. Yeah, exactly. And while that is a form of LARP, there's a lot of other things that fall under it. A lot of people like to call it like interactive theater. I know that's the fancy words that some companies use to get around venues not wanting to rent to LARPs.
Immersive
It is
experiences.
immersive experiences and interactive theater. So it's things like that.
There are LARPs that are very, very short. I know there are LARPs that are an hour or less in
I
some
think
cases.
the shortest I saw was 45 minutes,
45
including
minutes.
character creation.
Including character creation.
There you go.
Yeah.
There are LARPs where your character sheet, per se, is just like you're this emotion, or you've got this one feature that you're taking on. And then there's things where you
Yeah, where here's 5 pages of content. Right. Good luck.
And there's one-shot LARPs where you go into the space and you do the experience and then it's done. And then there's campaign LARPs where you go, monthly, or even some places. My first LARP experience was Vampire, which was 5-6 times a month. Right?
Wow, that's too much.
It's nuts. It's a bit crazy.
I don't have that kind of time.
And you play the same character through a long span of time. I have some friends that have been playing the same character for 15 years. It's crazy, yeah.
It's like longer than Phantom and Broadway or something.
That's intense. So that seems like a natural segue into like the different types of LARPs, because with the idea of like, oh, you can't LARP wrong. If you call it a LARP, it's a LARP. There are probably a bunch of different categories of LARPs, and we can like kind of go through them. So the first one is like theater or parlor style LARPs. If you guys have been to like anime conventions and you've looked at their program and you've seen the thing that's like, oh, in this room, for all of time throughout this entire event, there's just a LARP happening, right? You guys may have seen that going around, and that would be what's considered a parlor LARP. A parlor LARP is something where if I was gonna be like, surprise, we're forcing you to play a LARP right now in this room, that would be considered a parlor LARP. It's something that can happen in a single closed space. And
for example, guess what? You're all on the last voyage of the Titanic, and there's 1 hour to live. Go play, right? I mean, that's there's actually a LARP called Grandiose Disaster, which is a LARP that you can go online and I think purchase and then play, much like a murder mystery would be done at your own house or something like that. You gather your group of 15 people together, you pass out the roles, and you go do it. And then the goal is to experience what is going on in that last hour or two of the sinking of the Titanic, for example.
Yeah, and then the parallel LARPs, there's been, and I say recent development. I don't actually know that. I started LARPing like less than 4 years ago, so I don't necessarily know that. But there has been a lot of package parlor. Would you say that that's grown much more, where you can buy them online, you can buy them at a con, take them home, get your best buddies and do it in your house. Nobody's forcing you to go publicly and sort of do it in the middle of an anime convention where you're like, I don't know anybody in this room, I don't feel comfortable.
These people are weird, they smell weird, I don't like them, I don't want to be in a room with them. It's fine.
And parlor LARPs have varying levels of costuming that can be involved, all the way from nothing to, I'm wearing this hat, all the way up to full-blown.
I'm not trying to get any yums. Hopefully something.
Yeah.
Something.
Something.
Some sort of clothing is going to be on your body. hand in hand with parlor LARPs is like a caveat known as like a theater style LARP, and this can either be something that takes place again in a closed space like a parlor, or like on a stage in an empty theater, things like that. And that has more to do with the less about like, oh, you are points on a sheet. You have these skills that you can use in, you know, whatever combat, you know, trading cards, rolling dice, things like that. And it's more emphasizing on the character interactions, being able to communicate with each other in a character space and building the story through that. Player-driven as opposed to like GM-driven games.
So moving on to the next type,
Whee!
which is what I've got the most experience with from my playtime, is boffer LARPs, which are also known as, you know, the campaign style or adventure LARPs is another term that's coming up with those. Is generally players versus environment mixed in with players versus players, out in a campsite, out in the woods. Most people are dressed up in costumes of some variety. A large majority of these in America are going to be Eurocentric, fantasy-centric
Wild
variety
West.
games. There are Wild West.
Yeah.
There is horror, right? There's a big thing,
The
post-apocalyptic
post-apocalyptic.
horror. There is starting to become a lot more genres of that style together, but they generally meet for a weekend, Friday night through Sunday. You're in character the majority of the time. Some of them are 24 hours in character. Some of them are, you know, in character while it's light out, you know, or before you go to bed, kind of stuff. And you're generally camping, and so you're also dealing with the outdoors. And there's usually live combat with foam weapons, where you're trying to hit each other to various levels of hardness.
I realize that I've had 45 minutes of sleep, so I can't school my face. I'm sorry, I keep scowling at boffer. By the way, for the definite boffer, if you see the word boffer, it literally just means they're going to hit you with a thing. They're going to boff you.
Yeah. So that's the one that I've done a lot of. I've done a lot of parlor as well.
Taking freeform. Yeah, I'm taking freeform, which is usually this is all ad lib on me, but I'll read this here and then I'll extrapolate. But usually rules light. Sometimes they focus on one simple mechanic. Corporate icebreakers and team building exercises often employ some of the same techniques used in freeform LARP. You know, it's very much about character interactions. Yes, there might be like a point system that you're sort of like vaguely following, but it's much more about sort of coming together. And, you know, if you got the Titanic, that can be a parlor and simultaneously freeform. So that's where you start seeing this overlap of the styles, because there's so many of the things that make up a LARP that they just look alike. A good example of a freeform LARP. I've played 2 LARPs, so.
Oh gosh, freeform LARP. I'm aware of a freeform LARP where the entire premise is that you are cooking a meal. It is a 2-person LARP that happens over the span of 3 hours, where one of you plays a character who's cooking a meal, and the other person is receiving the meal, and you do that. I played a freeform LARP where the only guidelines we got on how to create a character was that we are all connected to this one person who is dead, and we're going through their life to try and put them back together. Freeform LARPs are where you get kind of the more out there concepts, like if somebody's like, I would like to LARP as a piece of toast, okay? That's going to be a freeform LARP.
And there's much more emotional involvement. They're mostly like emotionally driven, sort of socializing based. You know, your murder mystery is a little more free-formy, where the mechanic is the murder mystery, right? Clue is an example of that, if you've seen the movie, played the game.
And each of the styles has generally a different goal. Some of them are like play to win, where you're trying to overcome some challenges and come out the end, you're a victor. Some of them are, I like to call play to experience, where you just want to be in the space and see how it goes on. I know in Europe... I
just want to be toast.
Yeah, and I know in Europe there was one LARP where they rented an entire town in the Netherlands that had been occupied during World War II by the Nazis, and basically played being people in an occupied town.
Yeah.
Like, you're not there to win nothing, because that's, that's an experience.
Yeah.
Right? So there's as many different types of LARPs as there are people.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
There are two others that
Yep.
I want to talk about
Go
before
for
we
it.
move on. Three, technically, because one of them is fairly new, and I do not have the qualifications to talk about that one yet.
Yep.
But the other one, the one that I've had the most experience with, is blockbuster-style LARPs.
Mm-hmm.
These are the ones that are going to be like your destination LARPs. It is a style of LARPing that was really popularized in Europe, Scandinavia, Denmark, Finland, Germany, things like that. And it's the variation from just a freeform LARP is that it is an emphasis on high immersion, which includes things like really intense costuming. Maybe they have for their NPCs like a monster that they can put on and you will see it. What you see is what you get. And for blockbuster LARPs, they usually have pretty big budgets.
Yep.
So you see some pretty cool
Yeah.
stuff. Sorry. 45 minutes of sleep.
And to add on to the blockbuster, like if you think about, I try to explain it as Disney World meets Renaissance Fair. When we think about LARP, there's often these like Eurocentric views of like high-end costuming and all of that. So if you imagine, like the Disney World experience where these staff and this experience is sort of like immersing you in their world with these like high concepts of
How
Renaissance
many
or
people
not
in here are
Renaissance.
familiar with Harry Potter? So the best example of a blockbuster LARP that is a popular one that you can look up was a game called College of Wizardry, where they bought a castle in Poland and continuously ran like you're going to wizard college LARPs. And since it was already in a castle, already in a destination,
Yep.
it was like a high cost, everything was decked out. You basically went and lived that experience through the guise of a character who was either as close or as far from you as you wanted to make it.
Yep.
Some of the things that are usually pretty common with blockbuster LARPs is the general idea that like you'll get a character sheet that is like guidelines. No one's going to check you for points.
Nope.
No one's going to be like, you can't do that because it says on your you can do pretty much whatever you want, and it borrows that from freeform games
Yep.
of not really having
less
a
of a
wrong way.
game.
Yeah, it's more of an experience,
Yeah.
and these usually do emphasize less what American boffer LARPs tend to emphasize, which is play to win, and these tend to emphasize either play to lose or play to lift, which is the idea that like it's more interesting to tell a story. It's collaborative storytelling
Yeah.
more than anything, and it's more interesting if you are bad at things than if you're good at everything for the people around you.
Who's familiar with the improv concept of yes and?
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for those that are not, the idea is that I would offer up something, and then the people around me go yes and right. So like I'm a piece of toast, and Jess would say no, you're not. No, she would say yes, and I'm going to serve you to Barbara.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
And like, of course, there are caveats in this.
It's all a spectrum.
Yeah, everything is a spectrum. But blockbuster games emphasize trying to tell a story as grandiosely as possible with the people around you with like large, impressive things like crazy sets and costumes and things like that.
Yep.
We're going to talk about digital art.
Yeah, I have no experience with digital
Yeah,
art.
I
I
don't-
can
I've been
speak
watching
to
people.
digital LARPs. I've
Okay.
done a
Okay.
digital LARP. So, again, personal experience, history, whatever, spewing that out. But it's gained popularity in like the last 2 to 3 years, and it's sort of what you hear. It's digital live action role play, so you get to play from your home in your computer. Again, sort of borrows from freeform, borrows from the blockbuster sort of set design. I played as part of a digital LARP called Chariot LARP, where we were role playing that we were in a mission to go colonize a new terraformed planet, but we were going to be there in 3 generations. So our characters were leaving behind Earth that was sort of like hecked up and not going to make it. And, willingly knowing that we were going to live our lives in this ship and not see what is to come. And, we had anywhere from, the appeal of the digital is that the budget's pretty low. If you got some like video editing and some like screens that you can postpone to your camera, you can have effects like interrupted comms. You can have people join the. We used Google Hangouts, so it's just a Google Hangout. you could have somebody come in and join and add a new character out of nowhere per session. So they were pretty short. They were like 5 sessions long. And, you know, it's ranged from sort of sci-fi space theme to vampires, just newborn vampires. So you were essentially like LARPing from your coffin, essentially. Like you were in the room where you'd woken up a new vampire, and it sort of borrowed a little bit of the sort of mythos that we see in Vampire the Masquerade, which is another one sort of like ye old LARPs
cool
around.
Digital LARPs based on Fallout would be pretty neat too, right?
Yes.
But one of the key features of digital is that the computer screen that you're sitting at is actually part of the world interaction. So you're still embodying your character live, and that video camera and that screen that you're looking at is part of your world and is your view into everybody else's part of the world. There was also a digital LARP that was incorporated with a live LARP recently, the Cyberpunk one, where...
Yes.
Are you talking about Archangel?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Where there were people that were digital LARPing from their homes, and there were terminals at the live LARP that was happening that people could contact them, and it was part of an extended world outside of the space that everybody else is in.
You know, and again, in the search for new accessible ways to make LARP accessible, because as we mentioned, you know, especially blockbusters, it takes some money, it takes some costuming, it takes some whatever else, you know, getting to your destination, getting to your con to participate. The community has really found a way to sort of digitize the hobby, essentially. And that's sort of open ways for NPC opportunities where you're NPCing from your house with a chat live. Event Horizon uses it a little bit of that. And it's the same thing. So you're on a chat room and you're providing feedback. Sinking Ships also has a mechanic for that. So, you know, it's opportunities where you're involved in the world, you're still a character, and you're helping these players that are elsewhere create an awesome experience. So.
I'm going to throw one more in here before we get to the last one that we decided to add in, which is letter LARPing, where you're role-playing entirely through mail. You're sitting down and handwriting a letter and posting it to somebody somewhere else in the world, but it's an in-character letter. And
That just sounds like D&D to me.
it's kind of like it's like play-by-mail D&D was, or something like that.
Yeah.
But
The lines get blurry.
the lines get very blurry. So that's a new thing that I've seen cropping up, and so there's one going on right now that is set in like the words failing me. Victorian
maybe.
era,
I'm
yeah.
assuming. When
Yeah,
did they
yeah.
write
Sure.
letters?
Yeah.
Anytime before computers.
Yeah,
It's
right.
like,
And
Ooh,
so
90s.
believe it or not, you can
90s?
still write a letter
Like
now.
pre-internet.
No one's stopping
right?
you.
Can you imagine, like
Yeah.
pre-computer 90s,
But,
like 80s?
Yeah, no, so there are a lot of styles, and I firmly believe when people are like, LARPing's not for me, I'm like, you just haven't found your game yet.
Yeah.
It's out there. It might take some digging.
Yep.
The last style that is kind of a new style that none of us are qualified to talk about
No.
is emergent LARP, which is the idea of, for American audience, because a lot of these larger LARP terms have been coined elsewhere and have been used elsewhere, and just like all media, bringing things to a new culture means that you're going to have to deal with the culture's issues. Emergent LARP is the idea of kind of taking bits and pieces from every style of LARP and like kind of mushing it together in the sum is greater than, like, it's better than the sum of its parts. It becomes a better game if you have like the more clunky rules heavy things for people to do over there, but also like the freeform things over here, the blockbustery aspect over there, and ways to combine them all to make like a new kind of LARP tradition that like Americans can really cling to as their own.
There's two of those that are really in development right now. Damarung is running, and Velvet Noir are both, which you're actually part of.
I am part of Velvet Noir.
And I think to a certain aspect that Lost Colonies also falls under that umbrella a little bit, but we didn't know it until the term was invented.
Yeah, it was invented like what, 3 days ago on
I know,
the live
it's like
talk.
seriously.
Yeah.
Thanks, Erica.
Yeah. So I did watch Erica's chat on
Yeah.
that, and I think you covered it well. The example that sticks out in my mind was that at Damarung there were players that were, their goal for the weekend was to keep a shrine operational. And so they had to go out and set up little tokens and make sure that it was oriented correctly. And other people from different factions had goals to stop that from happening. But if you managed to keep it up for like 6 hours, you'd go to the GMs and say, hey, I did it. And they'd go in the database and they'd say, hey, this shrine was up and your gods are pleased, right? And then that would have then a spillover effect with some back-end computer system that affects the rest of the game. And as a result, the emergent play happens because somebody over there's stuff was messed with because you managed to do your thing here, even though you weren't directly in conflict with them. And then as a result, things happened that the GMs couldn't explain.
I think we're getting clunky.
Yes.
Because it's like 11:24.
Yep.
Sorry. This happens when nerds start talking about stuff. We get into the nitty gritty, and that's not what you're here for. This is a 101. We should be glossing.
Yep.
So, I mean, and within that, I don't think these need to be like super diverse. There are some different ways that you can have it. You can have various games that are like rules heavy, which is like, you know, the DR rulebook that's like, what, 900 pages long. Yeah. Or you can have like rules light games where like this could be all the information you get about your game. Go play. Yeah. You have like the episodic ongoing campaigns where like you can play this like you mentioned, the same character for 15 years if you wanted to. Or like there are planned duration campaigns, which is like kind of in the middle. Yeah. Like
3 years, 4 events a year, which is like Damaron's plan.
We have 12 events and then the story's over.
Yeah.
Do what you have to in that time. Yeah. Or there are one-shot games where you have the weekend or the day or the 2 hours and you have to tell a complete story, beginning, middle, and end in that time frame.
And then there's some like
whether you manage to tell the whole story or not, that's the whole story.
Yep.
It ends that way.
And that's okay. I think part of it too is that LARP has been also seen as sort of like, oh, like if this is not accomplished, then it's bad. There is no, again, going back to Jess's like top point when we started, it's like there is no wrong way. There is no wrong way to tell a story. It's a different story that perhaps you set out to say.
I will put a caveat there. The only way to LARP bad, the only way to LARP wrong, is to actively ruin somebody else's good time.
Don't do that.
Don't do that. That's the only way. That's the only thing you do. Don't be a jerk. That's all. I mean, you can play a character who's a jerk, but warn people beforehand.
Yes, your character can be a jerk, but make sure that you're not ruining somebody else's game experience.
Yes. And if you know, be accountable if it comes out they're like, oh, you doing that kind of ruined my day. Sorry, I won't do that in the future. To you.
Consent.
Yeah.
Very important point.
You get some really fun questions at various games. Do you mind if I kidnap you? Hey, can I shoot you right now? Yeah. Would it be cool if I stabbed you in the middle of this scene? Yes.
Go for it.
Wouldn't it be great if we were secretly siblings and we didn't know about it but hated each other? Like, that kind of stuff happens.
Yeah.
And then
collaborative storytelling.
Do we want to see if there are any questions before we go into the? I know you wanted to bring up LARPing as a person.
I do. I do want to do a little bit about LARPing while of color, because that's an issue. But before we get into that, if we can get some questions, because we just info dumped at y'all for like 20 minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, 20 seconds.
So
there is no quiz.
Yes.
When was the first time you started LARPing, and what was your favorite con? What was your character?
Okay, repeating the question for the microphone, when was the first time you started LARPing and what was your first character?
My first LARP was in 2016, so not that long ago. It was at a game called New World Magiscola, which is like the American version. I mentioned College of Wizardry earlier. It is very similar, where you are going to a wizard college in America. My character was a third-year student who was not nice. I don't play nice characters well, because I'm nice in real life. It's not fun to be me. Her name was, I actually just revamped the character this last run as a professor, which was fun. Her name was Tatiana Bradford, and she was a jerk, and I loved her.
Bradfords are all a jerk.
I know, they're awful. Like,
my first LARP character was in 1996. It was part of a vampire LARP. I played an FBI agent who was in deep cover, who didn't believe in vampires because he was crazy. And so he was pretending to be a vampire, even though he was a vampire. It was all kinds of messed up. His name was Brent Albertson.
Lots of bees.
Yeah, lots of bees.
Lots of bees. My first game was also Neuro Magicola. Jess and I were probably a weekend apart from each other's game.
What run did you go to?
First run.
Oh, I was at 3.
Yeah, there you go. So
Yeah.
same summer, same set of rules, same set of stories, and we had completely different weekends. So that's an example of
You
that.
were at the crazy run.
The crazy one. That's a different panel. But I played a first year student, so I wanted to experience a sort of like the sorting and the bushy-eyed student coming into college as style. And to like fast forward her story, she ended up being like a double agent for like the evil wizard situation. Her name was Ari Dolan. She didn't end up very happy.
Do they ever?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Oh,
So
why?
it can
bother?
happen.
But a very exciting opportunity. You know, LARP gives you opportunities to experience things outside of yourself, like, you know, not being nice, even though you're like the nicest person ever, gives you the opportunity to be like, oh, I would never do that. Like, I would never break this book in real life. But my character is like, doesn't care about schoolwork, doesn't do her homework, even though inside I'm like having a panic attack despite the fact we're not getting graded.
It's a fun way to be able to experiment with both doing things outside of yourself, and it gives you, one of the things that I want to talk about when it comes to LARPing with color is that it can, in Europe, where they care about mental health and stuff, like our country doesn't, there are some countries that recognize emergent styles of LARP as immersion therapy.
Yeah.
Because it gives you a way to work through things like trauma, things like societal pressures and things like that, in a safe environment where nothing that you do actually matters. Which is, I think, something that's very important, and I want to see it brought more to the forefront of LARPing in America, because I know a lot of people of color who avoid games because they're like, oh, I don't think LARPing is for me. I'm like, that's because the creators of these games haven't made it a space for you.
Yeah.
And I am here to tell them that if they want to hire me to make it a space for you, you can do that. Like,
I have. There's a whole lot of white people that play LARP, and there's a whole lot of spaces that are predominantly white folks playing LARP, and they can be really bad, but it is changing. It is
the LARP community as a whole, it used to be like a white boys club, hitting each other with foam swords, and it's changing. A lot of people of color, a lot of like femme voices, a lot of queer voices are being heard in wonderful, amazing ways, and it's fun and awesome to see. Do we have any other questions? We only took one, and then we got sidetracked again. Yes.
I came a little late, sorry, but I don't know if you'll hit this already. How exactly does like combat work in LARP?
It depends on the game. You can have games that go from very heavy boffer style, which is like, you know, hitting each other with foam swords, and every hit you take, it disables like a body part or whatever. I don't know. That I've never done that, because if somebody hits me with a foam sword, I'm going to punch them.
Yeah.
But or like point systems or things like that. It can be as simple as no combat. We don't do combat, or you negotiate whatever you want beforehand, as long as the person you're negotiating it with is fine. I've seen full like LARP fights done in groups of 3 or 4 who have sat and choreographed stage combat to be done in the middle of this scene to create something for other people to react to. So it depends on the game you're playing. It depends on what interests you. Yep. Like I mentioned, like I don't do games with a very heavy boffer, because if I get hit with a foam sword or shot with a foam dart, or somebody decides they can come up and like whack at me without my consent, I'm gonna see red and people are gonna get broken noses. And that's usually frowned upon in a game where you're supposed to have fun. Somebody's like, I tap you, like, that's not gonna work very well. So, but there are people who really enjoy the boffer combat. There are people who only go to LARP for boffer combat. Yeah. Stick jockeys exist.
Yeah, there are groups like Darkon and Ampguard, which are predominantly just combat scenarios. And then after the battle is done, everybody kind of drops out of character and just is like high-fiving and stuff like that, which are more sport LARP than theater LARP. And, you know, like we said, there's no wrong way to do LARP. If you enjoy that kind of stuff, absolutely do that. But every LARP has a different set of systems, a different set of safety. There are LARPs that don't have any combat at all. So
any LARP you will be interested in will tell you what kind of combat is there, probably within the first couple of sentences talking about the game.
Find the one you like and stick with it.
And if it's a setting that you're interested in, you're like, oh, but I don't know if I'm down with this combat, that there will be others in the same setting.
What's the best way to find a LARP?
Right now, quite honestly,
Facebook.
Google and Facebook.
Facebook. there are some like Facebook groups and like LARP communities, because so LARP is kind of like just like most creative endeavors. It's like it's a thing of passion. So you'll get people who have like, I've made this game. Here's what it's about. I think it sounds cool, and all of their friends are like, that is cool. Let me share it on social media. So social media, like you can find games on like Twitter. You can find games on Facebook.
I would call out 2 specific Facebook groups. There's one called Larpers of Color.
Yep.
And there's one called LARP Sanctuary that are both very healthy environments.
I would avoid LARP Haven like the plague.
Totally, it's a dumpster fire.
It is. It got taken over by Proud Boys.
Yeah.
So.
And there's been a lot of rise of area-specific LARP groups. So we've got the DC LARPers.
There's
DC area LARPers.
DC area LARPers. So it covers
And that's-
DC, Maryland, and Virginia.
Yep.
Also
So-
a little bit of Pennsylvania all the way
Yeah.
up to
Yeah. There's Virginia LARPers is another one that's it's not very active right now.
Yeah.
We actually have a Facebook group called Larp101, specifically for the people that come to this panel, so check that out. If you have any follow-on questions afterwards.
It can even be as much as posting like, I'm interested in this genre. Do you
What do
guys
I
know
do?
of any LARPs? Because once you know how to find LARPs, it's a community that's pretty interlaced, right? You know certain people know people who know people who know people who know people. So like reaching out and being like, I've always wanted to play like a Wild West game. Does anybody know of any good ones? It'll be like, give me 5 minutes and I can probably find you a list of about 6.
Yeah.
Like,
All right, let's move on to any
Yeah.
more questions.
any
Yes.
more questions?
Is there a way to learn how to do combat and like safely?
So
Yes.
every game that has any game that's worth its salt will have, before games start, a session called workshopping. And in your workshops, you're going to get things like safety mechanics, consent mechanics, hopefully some character coaching if it's a big character-driven game. But in combat-heavy games, they will teach you the combat rules, how to use them, and what to do if somebody is breaking them.
And some of them, my community for Lost Colonies, some of my players have organized fighter practices in the area. There's going to be one coming up in Inwood, West Virginia in August, I think. We're going to try to do one in Sterling in like maybe the September timeframe, where you just come out just to practice the LARP combat, because we know that the more comfortable everybody is with it, the better they'll be at game.
But if you're looking to go to a game for the first time and you're concerned about the combat, they will teach you how to do it. They will teach you what is acceptable and what is not. And if you are still feeling hesitant, go to your game runner and be like, hey, this is my first game with this style of combat. I'm nervous. And if they do anything other than go, cool, let me give you another rundown of it. Let me explain it to you better. Don't play the game.
Yeah, don't go.
If at any point you feel like playing a game and you go to the game runner, the person who's in charge, and you're like, this is my first game of this genre or my first game at all, can I get a little bit of extra help? If they say anything other than yes, absolutely, emphatically yes, don't play their game.
I know at our events, we specifically brief everybody at the game to calibrate to the person that you're fighting against. So everybody starts off at the slow rate to make sure that the person that they're fighting against is going to have fun. But if they already know that somebody else they're fighting as they fought against a lot, they can go harder sooner. So we specifically aim for making sure that people are comfortable during combat, that it's slow enough and interesting enough, and then as they get more experience, they can ramp it up.
Any other questions?
Let's
Before
go on
I
to
ramble?
let's go on to your ramble.
So, one of the things that a lot of people have been bringing up lately is the idea of LARPing while of color, specifically LARPing while black. It can be difficult. Everybody remembers all the terrible stuff that happened in Charlottesville, and one of the issues that was with it is that the protesters had LARP weapons with them, and it gave everybody a kind of a bad opinion of LARPing. And it can be a little difficult getting into it because there are just some games where people, no offense to the white people in the room, people of color, white people say dumb stuff a lot, right? And then you call them on it and they get really aggressive and angry that you called them on it. And there are definitely games out there that have made it a lot easier to exist in the space. But all I wanted to say is, like, if you have a game or a genre that you're interested in playing, by all means, approach the game, see if you want to. But if you see something or notice something that makes you uncomfortable,
Speak up.
speak up,
Please.
but also don't feel obligated to keep playing,
Yep.
and don't feel obligated to give this game good press.
Yep.
You can get some games that are like, oh, I want to play a Wild West game, and you go and you look into it and you're like, oh no, this Wild West game, this is an experience for my life, or I'm like, I want to go play this Wild West game. Oh, they have lynching mechanics.
No.
I'm gonna leave. Bye. Goodbye. I'm out. Outie. Always outie. Things like that. So there can be some kind of really insensitive things in a lot of LARPs from just
Hey, let's have
dumb white people who don't understand that some things can be taken poorly.
Let's have white people put on blackface to play dark elves.
That's another
Not a good
panel
idea.
also.
Not okay at
You
all.
can paint them gray.
Yep.
No, people aren't gray. Like, just, ugh.
And I'll just pre-warn you guys, if you do get into LARP Haven, expect an argument about that about every 2 weeks.
Yep.
Yeah.
It is terrible. And I
Turn it into a drinking game.
gives me heebie-jeebies.
Oh,
I'm
somebody
not-
in LARP Haven posted that wearing blackface for
Yeah,
drow is
so-
okay.
Drink.
Cool. It's so like it can be kind of hard to find games that are willing to make. There's a difference between saying black people can come play my game or people of color can come play my game, and saying I have purposefully cultivated a space where people of color are safe and can tell their stories.
Yep.
Because that's the important part, is being able to tell stories that resonate with you. And I mean, you can look at it. The first LARP that I went to, I could count the players of color on both hands.
Yep.
Out of
Visible,
total size.
out of 120,
150,
150
yeah.
people. I could count the players of color on both hands, and if we're talking about white passing, maybe a couple toes.
Yep.
And that's not okay. It's
Not
cool.
great. It's not great.
good.
But and there's like different levels of there. It's accessibility price tag. It's accessibility comfort zone culturally. It's accessibility of themes. It's accessibility of location. These things all have historically kept POC out of LARP. They've, the boys club has kept women out of LARP.
Oh yeah, so much.
So all these things are things that are still we're making great strides, but I think
Yeah.
we're still breaking down barriers that are very much still instated. And what that means is not playing those games. It means going and creating your own games. So much so, like Lost Colonies has made, and many others that are surfacing in the last few years. And it's, speaking up in the groups. Like, I'm not saying like go and like pick it out the game. Like if you don't feel comfortable going to the game masters, don't go. Come to one of the groups and say like, hey, this happened. You're not crazy. What you're seeing and what you're feeling is way more important than them catching a check, you having a cool costume, other people feeling like you belong there. Like all of those things don't matter if you're not feeling comfortable.
And I would also say, to add the whole, any game that's worth worth your time really, is hiring persons of color to do things like writing the games, running the games, sensitivity reading for the games, to make sure that the cultures are not culturally appropriative, right? To make sure that the content is LGBTQ and non-binary, friendly. To make sure things like pronouns are respected, and so many other things, and you will be able to tell pretty quickly which ones those are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you'll be able to, and then the rest will look, they won't advertise that stuff at all. If the LARPs are doing that, they'll let you know that they're doing it, and you'll also be able to look through galleries and see the pictures are going to include people that look like you do sometimes.
That's a double-edged sword.
Okay.
So like it's this catch-22 where LARPs weren't historically a place where people of color felt comfortable, so no people of color went. So there are no pictures of people of color at these events because people of color didn't think that LARPing was for them.
Yep.
It's a terrible catch-22, and it's one that hopefully we are changing.
Yeah.
Another thing that I suggest for people, if we're in the digital age where you can stalk anybody,
Yep.
right? You can look up, and most game runners, it's also part of it's not a popularity, it's not the wrong one. I've had 45 minutes of sleep. It's a marketing game. So a lot of them do have a pretty active online presence. And if you run a game, if you've ever run a game, and you haven't been called on everybody's got blind spots when it comes to their own biases. I've got them, you've got them, we all have them. Watching how people respond to that criticism is the key.
Yeah.
So, like, if you're interested in a game and you don't know much about the game runner, just
Search
go
for
through
them.
their Twitter feed and see how they handled people coming to them and being like, this is a problem that I've noticed that you've done in your thing. How are you going to do this? What are you going to fix about it? And if their response is anything other than, I'm going to look into it, we are going to make sure this never happens again, and I'm sorry, and then active change,
Right.
don't play the game.
Yep.
Simple as that. But there are definitely games out there that are, and not just your standard like DarkCon boffer games. There are intricate and interesting and fun games. Not that DarkCon can't be. I just don't like boffer. There are deep and interesting games out there that are making places for people to be able to tell their stories, because I don't know, people of color deserve fantasy too.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And that's all it is. LARP is just playing pretend, and gatekeeping is dumb. So
Yep.
don't let gatekeeping keep you out. I swear this would have been more focused if I had gone to bed last night.
It's all right. You're doing great.
I think we did great.
You're doing fantastic.
So
Thanks.
one more
Okay.
question.
Got time for one more question back there?
Oh, sure, I got a question. So like, I kind of run into this double-edged sword when it comes to like,
Can you speak
Sorry.
up? You have a double-edged sword role playing. Ah.
I like certain eras, like I got a cowboy fetish, right?
Right.
So I'm into like historical accuracy, but I also know that historical accuracy means like my skin tone don't work, right? So like, are there places, I guess, in the LARPing community where I can get some historical accuracy without being ostracized for the fact that?
Yes, you can. Honestly, if you like Wild West, come see. I got a name of a game for you right now. It's called Dead Legends. It's a Wild West game. I haven't played it.
But they're doing
But
the better work
they're-
of the Wild West.
They're doing the
things.
better work of Wild West games than a lot of people have been. And so there are a few ways that people can handle that. There are some people that are like, we're not going to touch on the topic. We're going to rewrite it. It just didn't happen in this fantasy world because all the worlds are fake, but everything else is historically accurate. There are ways to find it, whichever is in your comfort zone. And like, that is another concern of being a LARPer and being a person of color is, I like the aesthetic and the storytelling capabilities of this historical time period. However, in the real world, it would have sucked for me to live there. So there are definitely spaces where you can explore telling those narratives with or without the historical bias in a safe space. And there are definitely games that do it. And if you want to join the Larp101 group and ask about them, we can post for them. If you want to grab me after here, I can rattle off the names that come to my very, very tired brain. And you can look into them, because those definitely exist.
Yeah,
And I am also super obsessed with the Wild West, and I am desperately looking for one that will let me play a brothel, madam. I just want to bustle.
That's fine.
But yeah, no, I got you. And
Yeah.
we should... Games aren't going to make space for people of color unless we demand it. So just get loud.
Yeah, challenge, push the barriers, show up. Don't get sucked into doing a lot of free emotional work for them,
Boy, do not.
because that is an unfortunate thing that does happen in many cases.
Well, and this is also, the burden shouldn't be solely on LARPers of color. Like people, white people in the audience, white passing people in the audience. If you're going to a game that you enjoy and you notice that there's nobody of color at this game, say something. Talk to the game runners about it. Like, part of being an ally is that taking a little bit of the burden off of our shoulders when it comes to us trying to make a space for ourselves, and having you be able to be like, you know what, there isn't a space for you here, so there's not a space for me here either, and leaving.
Yeah.
Okay, we have 2 minutes.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Reintro.
Reintro.
So again, I am Jess, she, her, Jess Comstock. You can find me on the Facebooks.
I'm Joe Hines, he, him. I'm also on Facebook, and I run Lost Colonies LARP.
And I'm Barbara Perez. I am she, her. I am on the Twitters and the Facebooks at Mustache Babs.